My white German Shepherd puppy stopped so suddenly the leash burned my hand. My name is Warren. It was one of those cold, bright December mornings in Madison, Wisconsin, when the air feels clean enough to hurt a little. Iris had been bouncing at the end of the leash like she always did, sniffing every patch of frozen grass, checking every mailbox post for news. Then, in a single breath, all that puppy energy died in her body. She locked her legs, dropped her head, and pulled hard toward the edge of the small parking lot beside our street. At first, I thought she'd caught the scent of a squirrel, or maybe an old sandwich someone tossed near the bushes. I wrapped the leash tighter in my palm, muttered something about, "Come on, it's too cold for this," and tried to guide her forward. Iris didn't move. She let out this low, trembling whine I almost never hear from her, the kind that lives somewhere between fear and heartbreak. Instead of dragging me down the sidewalk, she started circling backward, eyes fixed on a thick tangle of bare branches by the cracked asphalt. Every time I took a step away, she stepped back toward those bushes, leash cutting across my wrist like a reminder. I finally sighed, turned, and really looked where she was staring. At first, all I saw was a dark shape pressed into the shadows, like a torn garbage bag shoved into the corner. Then it shivered. The shape lifted its head, and two huge, frightened eyes caught the light. A skinny young Doberman was curled into himself so tightly his ribs looked like they might cut through his own skin, tail jammed hard under his body. His coat was dull and dirty, his paws raw from the concrete, every line of him saying he'd learned not to expect anything good from people. Iris went quiet in a way I didn't recognize. She lowered herself slowly onto her belly, inching forward just enough to show him she was there, then stopping, giving him space like she somehow understood he was hanging on by a thread. I stood there on the sidewalk, thinking about work emails and errands and how this was probably someone else's problem, something a shelter or a city office should handle. But when I tried to tug Iris away, her whole small body turned solid. Muscles braced against the leash, and for the first time in a long time, I felt my own puppy saying nothing out loud and begging me with everything she had. I'd never seen a puppy argue with me like that. I gave the leash a small tug, just enough to say, "Come on, Iris, we tried. Let's move on." Instead, she planted her paws on the asphalt and scraped backward, nails clicking, eyes locked on the bushes. Every time I took one step away from the parking lot, she twisted her body and stared over her shoulder at that Doberman puppy, whining in short, broken breaths. Up close, I could see him better now. His coat wasn't just dirty, it was rubbed thin in patches. Every movement I made sent a tremor through him. He tried to fold himself even smaller, pushing his shoulders into the branches as if the bushes could swallow him. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just watched Iris from the corner of his vision, ready to bolt and too tired to do it. Iris lowered herself all the way down, chest flat on the ground, back legs stretched behind her, like she was refusing to be moved. She inched forward on her elbows, nose low, then stopped, leaving a careful gap between them. When he flinched, she shuffled back an inch, tail flicking, a soft whine slipping out like she was apologizing for scaring him. I tried again. "Come on, Iris, let's go." She answered with this long, thin sound that started deep in her chest and climbed higher until it felt like it was cutting straight through mine. Then she did something I still see in my head. She turned her head to me, then back to him, and took one tiny step in my direction and one tiny step toward the bushes, like her little body was being pulled in two. In that crooked, almost funny movement, I understood she wasn't being stubborn at all. She was drawing a line. Either we both walked away, or none of us did. I gave in before I even realized I'd lost. I loosened my grip on the leash, stepped off the sidewalk, and walked toward the bushes like a man walking into a conversation he didn't plan to have. I dropped down slowly into a crouch, knees complaining, keeping my shoulders turned a little to the side so I wasn't staring that Doberman puppy straight in the face. "Hey, buddy," I said, quiet, like I was talking to a scared kid who'd already heard every loud voice. I kept my eyes on the cold ground, just close enough to see his paws shaking. Behind me, I could feel Iris sit, not at my heel, but a little off to the side, exactly where he could see her. She didn't bark or lunge or act like this was some new game. She just watched him, head tilted, ears soft, tail giving these small, hopeful taps against the asphalt. When he flinched and tried to push himself deeper into the branches, Iris let out a low whine, almost like she was telling him, "It's okay, stay." I pulled a couple of treats from my pocket and set one on the ground between us. He stared at my hand but didn't move, eyes huge, chest rising too fast. So I slid the treat a little closer to his paws and backed my hand away. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he stretched his neck just enough to sniff, lips trembling, and finally picked it up like he expected it to disappear. "Good boy," I heard myself whisper. The word Jet just slipped out after it, like the name had been sitting there waiting for him. Iris stayed in her spot the whole time, not stealing the food, not inching in, just guarding the space we were slowly building around him. When I reached forward with both hands, I moved as if he were made of glass. "Easy, Jet," I murmured, more to calm myself than him. I got my arms underneath his narrow chest and belly and lifted, leaving his head free so he could see, so he wouldn't feel trapped. He was lighter than he looked, all legs and bones and a heartbeat you could feel right through your jacket. In the car, Iris scrambled across the back seat before I could even close the door. She wedged herself beside him, pressing her nose to his shoulder like she was plugging a leak. As we pulled away toward the vet clinic, she stayed there, breathing warm air into his fur, her body finally still. Jet didn't fight. He just let his eyes slide shut, not in panic this time, but in the kind of sleep that comes when you're too tired to keep being afraid. I thought we were just dropping him off for someone else to save. The scale said more than any blood test ever could. We carried Jet into the clinic in Madison, Wisconsin, and when they set him down, the numbers barely touched where a young Doberman puppy should start. The tech frowned in that tired way people do when they've seen this too often. She slid the scanner along his neck and shoulders, waiting for a beep that never came. "No chip," she said. "No owner." They took him to the back for fluids and blood work, and Iris hit the end of her leash like they were stealing him. I tried to lead her to the chairs, but she glued herself to the exam room door, nails scraping the tile every time it moved. When Jet let out one sharp cry, she answered with her own, thin and shaking. I sat there, useless, listening to my two dogs talk to each other through walls. The vet came out at last, voice steady and calm. "He's dehydrated and underweight," she said. "No obvious infections. His blood work isn't perfect, but it isn't hopeless. The good news is he still wants to eat. Dogs who eat are still fighting." I asked what usually happens with ones like him. She talked about shelters and foster homes and volunteers who try to turn street shadows into family dogs. When they brought him back, his front leg was wrapped where the IV had been. Eyes a little glassy but softer. Iris didn't rush. She stepped forward, slow, touched her nose to his cheek, and then gave one small lick to the edge of his ear. He didn't flinch. The vet watched them for a moment, then looked at me. "Do you want us to call a rescue?" she asked. "Or are you thinking about fostering him yourself?" Right then, Iris shifted closer and laid her paw on my shoe, like she'd made up her mind for us. Bringing a stray home is easy. Teaching him he's safe is the hard part. Standing there in that exam room, with Iris's paw on my shoe and Jet leaning against the vet's leg, I heard myself say it before I overthought it. "We'll foster him," I told her. "My kids have been begging for a second dog anyway." The vet smiled. Iris relaxed just enough to sit, and Jet watched us like he wasn't sure if this was good news or just another change to survive. When we walked through the front door, my daughter and son came running, socks sliding on the floor, eyes huge. They went straight for Jet with all the love in the world and none of the patience. Before they could wrap their arms around him, Iris cut in, sliding her white body between them and that thin Doberman puppy. She stood there, solid and calm, letting them pet her first, forcing everyone to slow down. I set a bowl of food on the kitchen mat, and Jet dropped his head into it like he hadn't eaten in weeks. The metal clattered against the tile every time he moved, his eyes darting up between bites, checking the room as if someone might snatch it away. Iris waited by her own bowl, then nudged a few pieces out with her nose so they tumbled toward his. It felt like permission more than sharing. Later, we all crowded into the bathroom, steam fogging the mirror as we washed the city off him in warm water. He stood stiff at first, but when my daughter rubbed his chest with a soft cloth, his eyes half closed, and for a second, I saw the puppy he was supposed to be. That night, I set up a spare dog bed in the corner of the living room, away from the draft. Jet sniffed it, then chose the strip of floor right up against the wall instead, curling there like someone might still open a door and send him back out. Iris circled her own bed once, twice, then stepped away from it and lay down on the floor beside him instead, just close enough that her tail brushed his paws. Watching them breathe in the dark, I felt a quiet shame settle in my chest that my puppy had understood what compassion cost long before I did. The first time Jet played, it didn't look like play at all. It was a quiet morning, sunlight coming in low across the living room floor. Iris trotted over with her favorite tennis ball, the chewed-up one she usually guards like treasure. She set it down right in front of that Doberman puppy, then backed up a few steps and sat, watching him like a teacher waiting on a student. Jet just stared at it. His head tilted, ears half back, eyes moving between the ball and Iris as if he was waiting for it to hurt him. The kids tried to help. My son bounced another ball in his hand. My daughter laughed when it slipped and rolled under the couch. Every sharp sound made Jet flinch. He shrank into himself, shoulders tight like noise meant trouble. Iris stayed calm, nose low, and nudged her ball with the softest push, letting it roll a few inches, then stopping it again. No zoomies, no wild circles, just small, careful moves. After a while, Jet stretched out one paw. He tapped the ball like he was testing the surface of a pond, then pulled back. On the second try, his claws caught the fuzz and dragged it toward him by accident. Iris's tail gave this quick, hopeful wag, and she did a little hop backward, giving him space like it was the greatest thing she'd seen all week. The kids didn't cheer, they just went quiet, all of us watching that tiny piece of trust roll across the rug. Later, when he lifted his head for a scratch, I noticed a faint ring around his neck where the fur grew funny, pressed down in a narrow line. Didn't take much imagination to picture a collar or a rope that stayed on too long. That night, Iris curled up on her bed, and Jet took his usual spot near the wall. He lay there for a minute, eyes open, then glanced over at her. Slowly, he got up, padded across the floor, and eased himself down right against the side of her bed so their backs almost touched. For the first time, he let himself rest there without watching the door, and I had the quiet feeling that this small choice to lie next to her was going to matter more than any of us knew yet. I stopped seeing two dogs. I started seeing one heartbeat in two bodies. A few weeks slipped by like that. Morning walks in Madison turned into a little parade. Iris on one side of me, Jet on the other, their steps falling into the same slow rhythm on the frozen sidewalk. Jet still checked the world for danger, but now he checked Iris first, watching her ears, her tail, her calm, and if she said it was fine, he believed her. At home, they moved as a pair. If Iris stretched out on the rug, Jet stretched out beside her. Same angle, same direction, like someone had copied and pasted the pose in opposite colors. At night, they often slept back to back, white fur pressed to dark, a puzzle of paws and tails that somehow always fit. The kids settled too. There was less shouting down the hallway, fewer slammed doors. Homework happened at the coffee table with two dogs lying at their feet, breathing slow and steady, turning our cramped apartment into something that felt softer around the edges. When we first brought Jet home, I told myself it was temporary, just until a rescue had space, just until the right home appeared. But the longer I watched him follow Iris from room to room, the harder it was to even mouth the words, somewhere else. Reality, though, has a way of knocking. Our lease technically allowed one dog without extra fees. A second meant a monthly charge big enough that I'd started doing late-night math at the kitchen table, wondering what we could cut, what we could juggle. Then, one afternoon, an email from the management office landed in my inbox. A neighbor had reported two dogs in our unit, and the message politely reminded me of the pet policy and the need to correct the situation. They weren't threatening to evict me. They were threatening to separate them. It's amazing how cold a piece of paper can feel in your hands. The notice from the management company wasn't angry, just firm. 2 dogs on the lease meant a second pet fee every month, more than we had sitting around in any account. Either pay it or bring the apartment back into compliance. That was the word they used, like one of my dogs was a broken appliance. After the kids went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and a cheap pen. Groceries, heat, school lunches, the car payment, the card bill that never seemed to shrink. That extra fee kept landing in the same place on the page, circled in my mind even when I didn't draw a line around it. Iris paced between me and the hallway, nails soft on the floor, checking my face like she could read the numbers. When I picked up the phone to call a local rescue partner, Jet wandered in and out of the room, tail low. I asked if they had space to take a young Doberman puppy, if we could still visit, maybe help find him a good home. The woman on the line was kind. She talked about intake lists and appointments, and owner surrender forms said gently, like a pillow over something sharp. Over the next couple of days, the air in the apartment changed. Iris stuck closer to me, her eyes following every time I reached for my keys. Jet started eating like he had that first night again, bowl rattling, glancing up between bites as if dinner might vanish mid-chew. The night before his appointment, he didn't curl up beside Iris's bed. He chose the patch of floor by the front door instead, nose pointed toward the hallway, like part of him remembered how it felt to be taken away. I had already given the rescue his name and our story, officially booked the time as an owner surrender. I told myself it was the responsible thing to do. Iris didn't buy it. Iris knew before we even reached the parking lot. The minute we turned into the rescue's driveway, she started shifting in the back seat, nails tapping, nose pressed to the glass. Jet sat beside her, quiet, that Doberman puppy body a little heavier now, but his tail tucked in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. When I opened the door, Iris hopped out and pulled hard toward the entrance, then stopped just short, looking back at him like she was checking whether he was really coming with us. Inside, the lobby was warm and smelled like cleaner and nervous dogs. The staff were kind, voices soft, hands gentle when they greeted us. They talked about finding Jet a great home, how he was young and sweet and had a good chance. All I heard was the part where Iris and Jet wouldn't wake up in the same room anymore. When a worker clipped on a shelter leash and started to lead Jet toward a hallway marked intake, Iris's whole body changed. She lunged forward, then dropped flat, right across the doorway, white fur spread like a barrier. They tried to coax her aside, but she dug her paws into the floor and let out this low, steady howl that felt too big for her small chest. Jet stopped, looked back over his shoulder, his body shaking just a little, then took one reluctant step after another like a dog who'd practiced being left behind. The staff saw it. One of them paused, watching the way his eyes never left her. "Maybe we can talk to a rescue partner," she said quietly. "There are sponsorship programs, options. We don't have to rush this." But by then, Jet had already disappeared through the doorway, the leash pulling him around the corner. Iris stayed where she was, scratching at the closed door with both front paws, nails clicking, breath coming in quick bursts. Standing there listening to that sound, I realized I was replaying the very thing I'd pulled him out of in those bushes. I heard my own voice before I'd planned the words. "I can't do this to them." The form was half filled when I picked up the pen again. I was standing at the counter, hand hovering over the line that said, "Reason for surrender," while Iris's cries leaked down the hallway. The woman from the intake office watched me, then glanced toward the door where Jet had disappeared. I set the pen down. "Can you bring him back out here for a minute?" I asked. "Please." They must have heard something in my voice, because a moment later the door swung open and that Doberman puppy came flying into the lobby like he'd been launched. He went straight past me and slammed his side into Iris, pressing against her so tightly, their bodies like one shape. She stopped howling mid-breath, nose buried in his neck, whole body letting go all at once. So we sat on the floor and I told them everything. How Iris found him shivering in the bushes. How she refused to leave until I picked him up. How he'd learned to eat in our kitchen and sleep by her bed and walk side by side with her through Madison mornings. I talked more about them than about my bills, because that was the real story. The staff didn't rush me this time. One of them knelt down beside us and scratched Iris behind the ear. "We work with a nonprofit rescue that helps families in your situation," she said. "Sometimes they cover part of a pet fee, sometimes food or vet costs. The important thing is keeping bonded dogs together when we can." They slid a different set of papers in front of me, not a surrender form, but an adoption agreement that listed both my dogs side by side. Iris, White Shepherd mix. Jet, Doberman mix. I signed where they pointed, feeling something tight in my chest finally loosen. On the way out, Iris and Jet lay down right in the middle of the lobby floor, noses almost touching, people stepping around their little black and white pile. Only when he sighed and closed his eyes did she finally close hers. Watching them breathe in sync, I realized maybe I hadn't saved Jet at all. Maybe he and Iris had just pulled me back from making a cold, reasonable choice I'd never have forgiven myself for. That was the day two dogs became one decision. Our apartment didn't get bigger, but somehow our world did. Weeks turned into months, and the shape of our days shifted around those two dogs. Morning walks in Madison settled into a new rhythm. Iris took the lead with that steady, confident trot of hers, ears forward, tail loose. Jet walked at her shoulder, not scanning every parked car and shadow anymore, just checking in with her every few steps like a student glancing at the answer key. When a truck rattled past or a door slammed, he still flicked an ear, but if Iris didn't spook, neither did he. At home, they found new ways to fit themselves into our small space. On lazy evenings, the kids would stretch out on the rug with their books, backs against two warm bodies. Iris's head and Jet's head often ended up on the same pillow, noses pointed in opposite directions, pages propped over their shoulders as if they were helping to hold the stories up. Sometimes I'd walk in and see four eyes half closed while my daughter whispered a chapter aloud, and it felt like the whole room was exhaling at once. The real test came the first time friends visited with their own dog. A bouncy little mutt burst through the door, nails skittering on the floor, full of wild energy Jet would have once seen as a threat. He froze for a second, then looked at Iris. She wagged once, easy and slow, and without waiting for us, he stepped forward and lay down in front of the newcomer, front legs stretched out, tail giving a small invitation. What used to be terror had turned into a quiet offer to play. Iris stayed his compass, but he became her shadow in his own way. If someone raised their voice in the hallway or a guest stomped too loud, Jet would calmly move closer to her, putting his body between the noise and that white shepherd who'd once protected him. One night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Jet woke me. He paced in and out of my room, nails clicking softly, then nudged my hand with his nose, turned and walked away, only to come back again, more insistent. I followed him to the living room and found Iris restless on her bed, breathing a little too fast, clearly uncomfortable, but trying to tough it out. We ended up at the emergency vet for what turned out to be a minor stomach issue. Nothing dramatic, but the important part was who had raised the alarm. The dog who used to shut down when he was scared had chosen to wake me for her. Now there are moments when I catch them looking at each other across the room, calm and sure, like they're sharing a secret I'm not supposed to hear. And I realized this was never really a story about me bringing a stray in from the cold. It's a story about one puppy finding another and refusing to let go. I thought I was just taking my puppy for a walk that morning. I didn't plan on changing anyone's life, least of all my own. If it had been left up to me and my schedule and my bank account, I probably would have walked past those bushes and never known what was hiding there. Everything shifted because a small white dog named Iris decided that keep walking wasn't an option. She stopped, dug in, and refused to pretend that a shaking Doberman puppy in the cold was nobody's problem. Jet was one of those invisible dogs you hear about in numbers and statistics, the kind that gets called just another stray. He became family because one stubborn paw wouldn't move. It hasn't all been cute moments and soft music. It's been vet bills, paperwork, hard choices, leaning on rescue folks who care enough to help families stay together. But every time I see Iris and Jet asleep with their faces pressed together, breathing the same slow, peaceful breath, it's impossible to believe that saving him was anything but worth it. So if you're watching this and you've ever wondered whether stopping for one scared puppy could matter, I'm telling you it can change an entire house. Sometimes the only difference between unwanted and home is one person willing to listen to what a dog is begging them to see. Join our brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.